Okay, great. Okay, Bethany, are you there?
Yep.
Okay,
yes,
thanks so much. You can begin.
All right. Hello, everyone. I have my phone on speakerphone, but if if it's muffled or hard to hear, please just let me know, and I'll pick up the handset. Thank you to Val and Cindy and the Housing Alliance team for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Pittsburgh Land Bank, which comes with sort of the legal, not legal disclaimer that I actually am not a representative of the Land Bank. The Land Bank is, in Pittsburgh here, a fully distinct legal entity. They just have no staff. Just want to put that out there to make sure that the distinction that I am actually an employee of the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and we do have a contractual relationship to get the Pittsburgh Land Bank sort of up and running, but it is its own separate entity. So I sort of get to wear two hats day to day, and sometimes take one off, sometimes take the other off, sometimes I'm wearing both. But I'm going to focus my comments, or today obviously I'm going to talk about the Pittsburgh Land Bank, but what is happening here in Pittsburgh is that we do have a very robust urban redevelopment authority already. So we've spent a lot of time making sure that the two are closely linked together but not duplicative or overlapping. And I'll get into more detail around that, but that's just a little bit of why, as Val introduced me, as the project manager for the Land Bank, not necessarily staff, but it's important that, and it's worked really well having me here at the URA, but working on that project to ensure that closeness. So to jump in, the Pittsburgh Land Bank is a new tool for the city of, here in the city of Pittsburgh, and we're trying to position it sort of as the, what's being referred to as sort of the Goldilocks option in terms of site remediation, but also property, vacant property recycling, reclamation. So we, the city of Pittsburgh has a real estate division here, and they have over time, using the tax foreclosure process, acquired an inventory of property, but their oversight in terms of their ability to finance and maintain and manage those properties, but then ultimately also dispose and transact them back onto the property rolls, the tax rolls, and into private productive use, has sort of very low threshold and very low criteria as to who it will sell property to, for what purposes. We actually don't even ask what purpose you're going to do with that property and at what financial consideration. All the way on the other end of the spectrum here in the city of Pittsburgh is our Urban Redevelopment Authority, which is of course bound by state redevelopment law and has fully on the other side from the city a very robust acquisition and disposition process that it has a lot of due diligence and oversight, and is which you'd want in terms of public vetting for large-scale commercial projects, regional, region-serving, multi-unit, very, high-financed projects. But there has to be a middle ground, and we've been missing that in the city of Pittsburgh for a long time. That sort of individual side yard, that one single-family or multi-unit house that you want to renovate and rent out or live in, and we just really have found that there's a gap in the system here in the city of Pittsburgh. Not only do we have in the city of Pittsburgh 30,000 what we consider distressed properties, which is over 20% of our footprint in terms of land here, but we also have a sort of transactional challenge as well. So we've been spending time over the last few years since the legislation, the state legislation and the local legislation passed, to make sure that we understood not just what the land bank could do in its niche, but that the other public agencies are oriented to make sure that that happens, and make sure that the land bank, when it's stood up and operational, is effective and isn't just adding additional bureaucracy to a system where we already have a lot of it here. So with that,
The conference has been muted.
Hello? Can everyone?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, you're good, Bethany.
Okay.
I just wanted to mute everyone, and I was trying to do it at the right time. Thank you.
Sorry. So with that, our land bank here in the city of Pittsburgh was created via statute or ordinance in the spring of 2014, so 3 years ago actually. We're already 3 years in, with the mission to, probably very similar to many of the other land banks across the state and the country, to return unproductive real property back to beneficial reuse. And it was very important here that equitable, transparent, and public processes be right up there in the mission statement. And that it's not just about revitalizing neighborhoods, but it's about strengthening the city of Pittsburgh's tax base and supporting diverse communities of all kinds. Oh, hold on 1 second. I'm having a little control issue. Okay. So sorry you can't see the below print in here, but why our land bank is different is that different, again, to reiterate from what the city already does and what the URA here already does, is that we're positioning it to focus on, to be flexible, to address the different needs of the different neighborhoods and markets here in the city. So one of the challenges that we face across the Commonwealth, and it's certainly no exception in Pittsburgh, is that with our challenging topography between our rivers and our hills, we really do have, as opposed to like maybe Ohio where it's more flat and you have more consistent markets, you don't have those sort of natural barriers. We really do have lots of very different challenges and needs when it comes to blight and distressed properties. So we needed to make sure that our land bank will be positioned to be able to interact with those different neighborhoods and those different needs. So providing it a broad set of tools and powers, but also really focused at the neighborhood scale. So that single-family infill, focused on keeping structures standing, so stabilizing them so they can be put back into use, into occupancy. Vacant land that's suitable for community needs, be that urban agriculture, a garden, a gateway in a neighborhood, a parklet, and that to take advantage of those state powers to make our property revitalization, mostly our recycling process, to get to clear title a little bit faster, ideally less expensive, and easier on the end user. And that here in the city, that we align the activities of the land bank with community goals and with the community planning processes. So where community plans exist or will exist, making sure that the land bank is taking those things into consideration. Really focused at the neighborhood scale. So if you've got the URA, which is focused at the regional scale or the master development scale, the land bank is being positioned for neighborhood scale revitalization. Okay, so with that framing, I'm going to take a step back. And I'm probably going to talk for about another 10 minutes. I know I get pretty wordy, and then open it up for questions. So I'm not going to present everything, but hopefully give everyone sort of a broad overview of the Pittsburgh Land Bank and how we got to where we are today, and then maybe have a dialogue through the questions. So I apologize for not mentioning that before. But a very high-level timeline. The land bank, again, was created via local ordinance here in the city of Pittsburgh in the spring of 2014. In Allegheny County, we actually have 130 municipalities. So this land bank is one of 2 land banks in Allegheny County. And as of now, the boundaries are only for the city of Pittsburgh. It has the ability to expand and partner and be multi-municipal, but as of right now, the Pittsburgh Land Bank is just within the city limits. Many of you may be familiar with the TriCog Land Bank, which is a multi-municipal land bank in mostly the southeast quadrant of Allegheny County. So it's important to know that the boundaries are, at this point, the city itself. It took about a year to sit the full board of directors. There was an interim board sat that met for about a year, but for various reasons, the interim board created some foundational structures in place, but there wasn't as much, weren't dedicated resources, even in terms of like a partial person, like a project manager myself, to work day to day on these issues. So the full board was sat in the fourth quarter 2015. And then between then and today, it didn't take a year and a half to develop draft policies and procedures. We'll get into a little more detail, but they've really spent the last year, I say they, but the Land Bank Board and the stakeholders affiliated with it, creating the foundational documents, the bylaws, all of the sort of nuts and bolts of standing up a new government agency. So to the public, it looks like a land bank was created in April of 2014, but we still don't have a land bank yet 3 years later. But that's because, as everyone on this call knows, there's a lot that has to go on behind the scenes to get to the point in which, to the public eye, the land bank will actually be interacting with land. So we're not there yet, but we do have a plan to get there by the end of this year. So right now, we have our draft policies and procedures, which is a key foundational document that is a necessary point in our development. So just a little more detail about how what we've been doing as the land bank in 24, and you can see as time has gone on, sort of the activities have really increased. And in 2016, the Urban Redevelopment Authority was hired by the land bank to act as administrator, so fiscal administrator, day-to-day sort of staffing needs. I say hired staff, that staff is me. Again, I'm here at the URA. Executed its first set of technical assistance contracts, brought on special counsel. So there is, they do have their own legal counsel. All of their financial functions, and of which they have a very small budget right now, run through the URA's financial management process. They passed their first budget, of course, went through their first audit, and many different formational documents. So even though we're currently, and I'll get into more detail about talking about the policies and procedures, looking at the sort of broader policies and procedures of the land bank, they have before this, leading up to this, throughout 2016, passed individual policies like an ethics and a conflict of interest policy, an expenditures policy, fiscal policies. So they have those other organizational policies. They worked up on many of them throughout 2016. At the end of last year, came up with some communication material and branding materials, got its own logo, its own image, it's creating its own website to really start, because the land bank's now at a place where it's having public dialogue, so it needed to have some type of not just name recognition, but these really important communication tools. So using website, email, social media, there's a Twitter page to communicate and engage with the public, so that when people hear Pittsburgh Land Bank, they may not know exactly what it is, but hopefully they can find out. They know they can go somewhere to find more information about it. The Land Bank Board engaged in some education and training in 2016. They also contracted with the Center for Community Progress, the National Technical Assistance and Policy Organization, to come in and provide. They did engage in a board retreat for us, and the Board of Directors went to the Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference in the fall, as well as essentially unofficially developed a peer relationship with the Lucas County, Ohio Land Bank, which is where Toledo is. So it's about 4 hours away, 4 hours northwest of Pittsburgh. But it has very similar demographics and very similar scale of blight, maybe not necessarily types of interventions needed, but very similar levels, population decline, levels of blight. And they're about 2 years further along in implementation, so it was really important for the land bank, the Pittsburgh Land Bank, to be able to develop that relationship and to look to other land banks, certainly around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and also their partner now in Toledo to learn from and honestly sort of beg, borrow, and steal all the things that they'll let us use in terms of the things that they've learned over time and even their own foundational documents. So that's been a really important relationship that was developed in the fall of 2016. And then went through its first procurement process, another important step in an effort to, just as another step in starting an organization, has now its own procurement policy and went through its first full RFP procurement process to engage a vendor to a set of consultants to oversee the community engagement and facilitation process around the vetting of the policies and procedures, and I'll talk in more detail about that momentarily. So who is on the board? Who is it that's making the decisions for the Pittsburgh Land Bank? We have a 9-member board of directors, which is legislated to be essentially a tripartite board. There are 3 mayoral appointees, 3 council appointees. The mayoral appointees have to meet the specific expertise that a land bank may need. So one person has to have planning expertise, one person has to have financial expertise, and another has to have real estate expertise. So the mayor's appointees have to sort of meet those 3 needs. Council has 3 appointees, but they must come from the 3, what we refer to in our ordinance as the most impacted districts. So we do have 9 council districts, and by sheer count, so number of parcels, the number, which is an analysis that will have to be done on I think we're doing it every 2 to 3 years at this point, which 3 council districts have what I'm going to say the most blight, but there's a formula to tax delinquency, condemned properties. There's a couple of different things that fall into that category. We'll run that analysis, and those 3 council members each get to appoint someone to the land bank board from within their district. And then those 6 come together and appoint 3 community representatives. Now, they can determine whatever process they use to appoint those representatives, but since we're only in our first year, our first full year of board membership, we're still on that initial set of board members, and they were brought on through a public nominations process that brought in nominations from the general public. There's a nominating committee that made a recommendation to the board, and that's how we got the 3 community representatives on the board. So a 9-member board that meets monthly. They've been meeting monthly since the fall of 2015 in our city council chambers, and the meetings begin with public comment. They are open to the public. They are recorded and televised. So they meet the second Friday of every month as a public body. So where are we now? We've spent time throughout the fall educating ourselves as board members and staff and capacity support to the land bank, and developed a set of policies and procedures, as well as a website with which to educate the public as well as get input on them. The policies and procedures themselves were developed via two different documents. So I mentioned the Center for Community Progress's board retreat, facilitating a Pittsburgh Land Bank board retreat in the fall. They took all of that information and created essentially a high-level framing set of about a 5 or 6 page, really high-level policy document that laid out the priorities. What are the priorities of the land bank? What type of land should it acquire? Who are its priority transferees or purchasers, and provided us with that document. And then, fortuitously, being able to build the relationship with the Lucas County Toledo Land Bank, again, reached out. Their policies and procedures are in their 3rd iteration. So again, they're 2 years into land operating, interacting with land, actually having a portfolio of land, and have learned a lot. So they're in their 3rd iteration. They've refined their policies and procedures 3 times in those 2 years. So we took Center for Community Progress's document, the Lucas County Land Bank's third iteration of the policies and procedures. And we sort of merged them together and made them as Pittsburgh relevant and specific as we could. We found that in the developing of the policies and procedures, we could go a number of different directions. We could make a high-level policy document, or we could have something that was more detailed and did lay out more procedures. And we went in that direction. So our draft document is actually 27 pages long, and it goes into quite a bit of detail around the issues that are really important here in Pittsburgh, around how the land bank will choose what land to acquire, what are the conditions under which that an individual or end user needs to be qualified to be eligible to purchase property, what are the types of inventory the land bank will have, what are its maintenance standards, and then ultimately its disposition processes. So there's quite a bit of detail about those things, but there are other areas where there isn't a lot of detail. So we developed this document, and per our legislation in 2014, our local ordinance, the inaugural policies and procedures needed to be, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump a couple slides because I just kept talking and forgot to advance it, so I apologize. So the inaugural policies and procedures need to be vetted by the general public. There needed to be a public input process. A draft needed to be created, sent to the public for input, and then refined, and then our city council has to adopt the inaugural draft as well. So we created that document, put it out into the public domain. It was important that it be out there for at least 30 days before a series of public meetings took place. And we're on the tail end of those 5 public meetings. So now we've got our consultants taking all of that input that's been received via those public meetings, via an online platform, via email, in-person meetings, like one-on-one meetings, and it's taking them all and creating a report for us. And then the board will use that to provide guidance as to how to refine the draft document, and we'll ultimately then send that to City Council for approval. So we're right in that threshold right now or that place right now where the document's been public for, 2.5 months at this point. So the document was made public for over a month. We had 5 different community meetings, and we're just waiting for the report from the consultants to then make edits to our what will become ideally our inaugural policies and procedures. So that document then will go to City Council and the Mayor's office for adoption. And the next thing we have to do is create a strategic plan. So we've, the policies and procedures are the sort of why the land bank exists, what it wants to do, or how it's going to achieve its mission. And then, the strategic plan will really lay out the sort of the activities and the tasks day to day. Where is it going to focus? How many of what activities is it going to do, and when will it do them? So that document, we're looking at releasing an RFP next month. We have to finalize some fundraising first. So I'm releasing an RFP and engaging a consultant to help us create our first strategic plan. And then, obviously it's not that straightforward. It's not policies and procedures, then strategic plan, and then the land bank becomes operational. But those are really the 2 big items in front of us that we're looking to finalize, and then the policies and procedures, and tackle the strategic plan this year, so we can stay on target to become operational, as in interact with land, by the end of 2017. I think everyone's still muted, so I'm just going to keep going. I have a few more slides that I want to touch on about the policies and procedures themselves, because this is what we've been spending the majority of the last few months at the board and staff level really discussing. So we broke down our policies and procedures and I think it's been helpful to us. We've learned about how to interact and how to talk about the land bank and what the land bank will do with the public via all of this, these community meetings and the vetting process to really break down not just the document, but the roles of a land bank in terms of a few sections. And I just want to go through them high level. And I want to direct you to a couple of resources after, at the end of the call to check out on the land bank webpage the frequently asked questions that are specific to our policies and procedures, but really do take what is a more technical document and put it into, I think, a little bit more digestible terms for someone who may not live and breathe land banking every day, which is most of the population of Pittsburgh outside of like the 10 of us. So to break that document down and to break down the way that we talk about the land bank and have been engaging with the public about it into these sections around authority and accountability, like not just what can land banks do, but what can the Pittsburgh Land Bank do? Like land banks can be developers, but the Pittsburgh Land Bank will not be a developer, and it's just as important for us to talk about what it can do as well as what it will not do. Equitable development is a dialogue that only in the last few years really has it become front and center, but how will the land bank actually advance equitable development? How will it be funded? How is it held accountable? Those really basic concepts that are really important and reflected in the policies and procedures. And then talking about, and I won't go into this detail, but acquisition, how the PLB not buys but acquires land. What are its priorities? And again, here in Pittsburgh, we're really looking at neighborhood scale. So individual commercial properties on a main street, if there's a large commercial development, that will still go to the redevelopment authority. But if it's an individual house to rehab, a neighborhood scale project, 1 or 2 vacant commercial storefronts on a main street, vacant land like those teeth on a street, those potential side yards, that's really where the PLB, the land bank, will focus. How properties are identified for the land bank, how it legally can acquire property, and how it will preserve home ownership. So one of the big dialogues here in Pittsburgh is, will the land bank interact with occupied properties, or how will the land bank interact with occupied properties? And there is a priority set into the policies and procedures that it is the goal of the land bank to protect owner occupants and to have really strong hardship payment plan standards and develop a set of tangled title legal services to actually help homeowners who maybe have tangled title, tax delinquency, other issues, to get free and clear title, to not just preserve their home ownership, but hopefully stabilize it. That's another area that we're focusing on here. And then to talk about the types of inventory that the land bank will have and how it will manage and maintain its properties. So we're looking at the inventory of the Pittsburgh Land Bank in sort of 3 different buckets. We've got the residential structures, those neighborhood scale commercial structures, and then vacant land. And that's, very high level, but the way we reflect it in the policies and procedures is really we break down the acquisition, management and maintenance standards, and disposition, both in terms of priority end uses, end users, and financial consideration, into these 3 categories, because each are treated differently based on where Pittsburgh's at and what Pittsburgh needs in the policies and procedures, and how it will manage properties. So not just the transparency and public notice around what it's going to acquire, but also what it's going to dispose of. The land bank has a mandate in the policies, the Pittsburgh Land Bank has a mandate in its policies and procedures that is really a budgetary exercise, but a budgetary function, that it must make sure that it can maintain it has enough money to maintain its existing inventory of land to sometimes minimum code standards, but in the document it also reflects higher code standards, to a code threshold before it is allowed to grow its inventory. So before it can acquire more land, it must make sure it has the money to maintain the land it has. And there's been some really interesting conversations about this in terms of being able to remediate blight or at least recycle property to create a new future. If the land bank can't maintain it, but it at least can get it halfway to new ownership, is that a goal? And should the is that budgetary requirement around that budgetary obligation around maintenance too stringent? And I don't know that we have that answer, but that's where we're starting from this year. And certainly, I think we look at the policies and procedures as a living document that will be revised and probably be revised significantly and fairly soon, fairly early after initial operations. But that's going to be our starting point. We need to we talk about it, we say the land bank needs to learn to walk before it can run. So we're putting these pieces in place, and we're going to look at a small inventory of properties before we really start trying to get to some scale that makes significant impact here in the city. So we have to manage its inventory. And then how does it dispose of land? Like, who is a qualified user? What is the formula through which sales prices will be set? When do we need to engage with the community? What are the priorities? And again, they're different per category of inventory, be it residential structures, commercial structures, or vacant land. And then, what is the public notice obligations, not just in the state law, but our local ordinance, and then our policies and procedures lay out some enhanced public notice depending on the type of property. And then we built an appeals process, which we didn't need to do. There's already an objections process for multiple interested buyers, but if you disagree with a decision made by the land bank, we built an appeals process. But we thought it was important to give that final piece, but also to make it known that and there are two steps to it. You can appeal to the chair if you don't like that decision, then you can appeal to the full board, but the full board's decision is final. It must be timely, but it is also final. So we thought it was really important to build that in. So we went out and have discussed in detail with the public this document, gotten a lot of different input, a lot of areas where we've learned, and again, we're still waiting for the consultant's report, but a lot of areas where we learned, like gaps. We don't really address green space in urban agriculture. We reference vacant land, but we don't we don't talk about it in detail. And so we've learned that there may be some places that we really need to enhance the document. It's already at 27 pages, but that's okay. We do also need to we know that we need to find the balance of not being too prescriptive, but also making sure that the public has a level of comfort and initial trust in the land bank. So what's next is throughout the rest of 2017, we'll finalize the policies and procedures. You can see that we're hopefully on the sort of tail end of that inaugural document being authorized. Continue with needing legal support and rounding that out. That includes some intergovernmental cooperation agreements, some cooperative MOUs between city agencies to make sure that there's both alignment as well as, agreement around, some of the legal pieces that are necessary to be incorporated, like the tax foreclosure process, the transfer of inventories between government agencies. We're starting to do some fundraising this year from mostly philanthropic organizations here in the city for startup activities, but also in conversations with the city of Pittsburgh around what financial and or in-kind resource support may exist there. And then again, we're going to RFP out for strategic planning, and we hope that by the middle of the fourth quarter, so about a 6-month process, we'll have a strategic plan in place. And then we'll spend the fall developing the partnerships necessary, be them maintenance agreements, agreements with local community groups, insurance providers. The land bank, because it doesn't while it has a board of directors and we'll have directors and officers insurance shortly, we'll need to look into, very basic general liability insurance to make sure that it's covered for when it owns property. So it'll create those partnerships and engage those vendors and services throughout the fall. And then, of course, that's all organizational development ongoing. So just to reiterate, We think we are on course for being operational by the fourth quarter of 2017. Of course, it's operational now, but to the public, again, that means interacting with land. And the initial plan is to look at the existing surplus inventory between the City of Pittsburgh and the Redevelopment Authority, the URA, and transfer probably 50 to 100 properties into the land bank. So it won't necessarily go really through the acquisition mechanics or its procedures at the beginning, but it will have the maintenance obligation. It will be able to work through its disposition policies and processes, and just really start there before we scale up. And that's all. I went a little longer than I expected in my presentation. But that's all the presentation I wanted to give. I'm trying to cover sort of the high-level bases and then just open it up to questions that you may have.
Okay, great. This is Val again. Thank you so much, Bethany. That was very informative. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unmute all the lines. If I notice it's too loud, I will mute everyone, and then if you have a question, you could do *7. But let me try to see if this will work for a moment.
The conference has been unmuted.
And this is Cindy. People can mute their own lines with a *6 if you have some background noise, and then you can unmute with a *7.
Yes. Questions for Bethany?
Hey, Val, this is Winnie. I have a question. Hi, Bethany. How you doing?
Hi, Winnie.
I was wondering, you mentioned a number of policies that the land bank had developed. Are those available for review on your website? And I'm asking because it would be great if we could include those in the PA Blight Library website.
Sure, yeah. They're all available on the website at current. I'm pretty sure I think everything is up there at this point, but I'll also send you the raw documents.
Oh, that would be great. And then I had one other question. I love the idea of partnering with another out-of-state land bank like Toledo, and I was wondering, was that something that you worked on through the Center for Community Progress?
We reached out on our own, but on their recommendation. We asked them what land banks did they think would be most helpful to us and why. And they recommended I say Toledo, but Lucas County, as well as Greater Syracuse, for very different reasons. Toledo because it's a similar sized city with similar population and like levels of blight, and was still just a couple years in. And Greater Syracuse because they have some really interesting programs around saving residential structures, preserving home ownership, working with landlords and tenants, and that's a focus that became clear as a priority when the legislation was created, but also when the policies and procedures were being developed. So because of that focus, they recommended those two land banks. And we were all going to the conference in the fall, the National Reclaiming Vacant Property in the call, and we just reached out and said, hey, are you going? Can we meet up? And sort of just started relatively informally, and it's really worked out well at least for us. I don't know if Toledo's gotten a lot out of it so far, but we yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Another question for Bethany?
Remember, you can *7 if you muted yourself.
Val, this is Winnie again, and I don't want to ask too many questions, but I was curious when you said you record and televise the land bank meetings. Are you able to see if there are, what your audience is? Because I found from talking to other land banks in PA that other than in Philadelphia, which has a pretty regular group of attendees, that there really aren't that many people who are attending the land bank meetings. So I was curious what your experience has been.
Ooh,
or even in person, do you have people who come to the in-person board meetings?
So because we're in city council chambers and council meetings are recorded and so they're televised both on television but also online. So I don't know if we can track television, and we can probably track viewership, obviously not to the household or like the individual, but online
Right.
we might be able to see like how many hits or where those are generating from, even geographically. Like this area of the cities, tuning in more or whatnot. I hadn't even thought of that. In terms of the meetings themselves, they aren't, I think we'll get anywhere from 5 to 15 people attending.
Yeah.
Certainly now that we're more public facing, and there's always an opportunity for public input, but like they're at a place where these decisions are being made. More people are sort of tuning in and showing up. I think, showing up to the meetings, but yeah, they're not really well attended. But
Great, thank you.
I will also add that we currently have 2 websites, which isn't like fully ideal. It was somewhat practical so our current website is just being hosted through the city of Pittsburgh, but they're going through an entire sort of overhaul process, so it's very limited in terms of functionality and look and what we can post and how many changes we can make. It's free, and the infrastructure is already there, so that's sort of our basic website day to day. But then we created this other secondary website just specifically for public input. It's more of a survey-based platform for the policies and procedures. So I think that we do get more web hits, maybe not viewing the meetings themselves, but activity on the website.
That's great, thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, this is Cindy. I just want to thank you, Bethany, for not only for a good program, good presentation, but for excellent work over the last few years. And I know you focused on this even before you went to the URL, and it's good to see it moving along. I know it's been a frustratingly slow process for some in the communities, but you're moving along, and that's great.
It feels much more real and more tangible now, which is it's certainly rewarding from that perspective. But we're excited, and we're starting to see progress, and I will also say that public engagement process, the public input process and community engagement around these draft policies and procedures, I would say that the comments we've received are much more positive. Not that there aren't things that have been missing and things that we maybe missed the boat on altogether, but they're being provided in a really positive light. So the tone right now is still very, even though everyone, myself included, is like, it's been a while, we want to see a land bank, we're frustrated, we're so close, can we get there? Or we will get there, but we're just not there yet. The comments are still being made with a positive tone, and I think that's keeping us all going. It's refreshing after this much time that people are still, even though they're frustrated, the general sentiment is still very positive.
That's excellent.
Could I just add, this is Irene McLaughlin-Clark.
Irene.
Hi. Oh. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know that Bethany wanted to try to be really focused on the land bank issues, but as we've seen, where we've seen land bank discussions start to happen, this law, I think, is so unique in having systems change potential. And while it's just too much to speak of about, in a context of just focusing on the Pittsburgh Land Bank, there has been, and I'm talking from 30 years of following how systems and municipalities address blight and abandoned properties, there has been truly a systems overhaul prompted by the Pittsburgh Land Bank and the expertise and experience and years that Bethany Davidson and others, but especially Bethany Davidson, has brought to this effort. So it is really exciting to see the progress that is being made, and a lot of it is very invisible, but I think we're going to see become so important in the systemic new way to deal with our land. So I just wanted to make a comment.
And we do need to acknowledge Irene's contribution to all of this over the years.
No, you don't need to. No.
I need to. Okay. All right.
No, but I really do think it is so fascinating to see how this land banking legislation promotes conversations that promote systems change.
Yeah. Very cool. And I know people are seeing that in their own communities around the state, which I want to see if there are any more questions for Bethany, but then we do want to hear what else is happening, and maybe even think about your own land banks in the context of Irene's comments, and what are you seeing in terms of systems changes and attitude changes in your communities. Any other comments on the Pittsburgh? I'm sorry, Val, I'm jumping in here, but
oh, that's fine.
Any other comments on the Pittsburgh Land Bank or questions, Bethany? *7, remember. So what is happening around the state? I didn't keep a list of who all's on the phone, and I don't want to call people out by name, but we'd love to hear what's going on. Now, I have an announcement. We got Winnie and I were at a workshop yesterday with DCED, and we were informed that as we spoke, literally, the city of Lebanon.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, great. Well, tell us what's going on in Lebanon.
Well, we submitted the ordinance to the state, and we have one taxing body. We're kind of put the cart before the horse here. We have one taxing body that did not yet approve the request, but we believe they will be doing that. So we're in the plans and procedures state. We have a land bank board appointed, and we're taking baby steps.
Okay, that's good. That's the way you start. Well, I hope you find these calls helpful.
They have been, very much so. And I'm especially interested to looking at some of those policies and procedures just to see what Pittsburgh has and see if we can't steal some of those as well.
Absolutely.
From the
okay, thank you.
Steal them from the Steel City, right? Okay, so, well, that's great. Do you have any thoughts, maybe you haven't gotten this far, but how you want to approach the problems in Lebanon or where you'll be focusing?
Well, fortunately, Lebanon does not have a huge problem with tax foreclosed properties. We are thinking that we might only be acquiring, maybe a half dozen properties per year. Our problem is, I can just give you a brief background how we came to be seriously thinking about the land bank. About 2 years ago, the city had an economic development plan done, and the plan identified about 30 different action items, one of which was to investigate the possibility of a land bank for the city. And then we formed a committee, began looking at this, and said, yes, we realize we don't have the problems that you might have in a Pittsburgh or a Harrisburg or the larger cities, but we have a problem nonetheless. And what we really want our focus to be is to have these properties. We probably in most cases we're not looking at any kind of demolition, but we want to have them rehabbed, and then we want them to go back into home ownership, because the city's rental right now is about 58% rental properties. So we need to chip away. We want to chip away a little bit at that and try to encourage more home ownership, and this is just one tool that we think we'll be able to do it with.
Very good. Very good. Any first, any questions or suggestions for Lebanon? And if not, what else is going on? Who's got a project to tell us about? Star 7 done. Who just acquired some properties? Anybody? Winnie, do you have any thoughts for this afternoon?
The only thing I wanted to mention is if for the policies and procedures, and I know I've spoken with you before, the woman who just spoke from the City of Lebanon, but there are some policies and procedures already posted on PABlightLibrary.com, and if there are any particular ones that you want that you don't see, Bethany said she's going to send them around, but I have some others too. I just have to make sure all the ones that I have been posted onto the Blight Library. And just to say that there's really been a lot of activity in acquisitions recently in land banks, and a lot of you who subscribe to the Blight listserv or do your own Google searches, you'll see there's been a lot of recent news articles about acquisitions in Lackawanna and in Philadelphia and in other land banks across the Commonwealth. So it's all good. I think they're all starting to come into their own as they figure out what's going to work in their communities. And what I loved about what Bethany said too is that you're looking to preserve and stabilize home ownership and to preserve some of the structures. And I think that's really a key part, especially in some of the older communities that have a lot of historic buildings, being able to balance the needs of redevelopment with preserving the character of the community as well. So I think that's terrific.
This is Bethany. I have a separate item but I don't want to jump in if other people have updates or questions.
Go for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Has there been any discussion about the co-sponsorship memo that Senator Stefano sent out a few weeks ago to amend the Land Bank Act to provide some of those sort of special powers to redevelopment authorities? And I don't think it'll impact us in the city of Pittsburgh. Of course, there's no legislation yet. It's just a co-sponsorship memo. But in those jurisdictions where Senator Stefano in particular and others represent that don't have aren't necessarily interested in having separate agencies or don't have the capacity to have separate agencies, I just think it's an interesting, it just went around a couple weeks ago, and I didn't know if it was on people's radar, and particularly if there are active land banks in those in his district, if there are thoughts.
Thank you for raising that, Stephanie. I must admit to having let it slip past me, and I will send it around to this group. And I did hear one of the redevelopment authorities putting forth this idea, so that's about what I know about it, and would like to hear people's comments. Again, the idea that in some places they don't want to go through the hassle of setting up a land bank, just want to expand the authorities of the redevelopment authority, give the redevelopment authority some of the special powers that land banks have. So the people on the phone, obviously, your communities did set up land banks. I mean, there could be some on the phone who are just in process. So maybe the way to approach this is to ask you what, what's valuable about a land bank, and if there had been this opportunity just to expand the redevelopment authority, do you think you would have gone that way?
Well, I could respond from Lebanon's point of view because I am a redevelopment authority, and I think the city would have preferred using the redevelopment authority for some of these activities rather than creating the land bank.
Okay. Thanks. Anyone else?
I mean, here in Pittsburgh, I think 3 years ago, if this had been a possibility, we would have strongly considered it. At the same time, I'm curious about sort of, at least in Pittsburgh, that firewall between, redevelopment authorities having the power of eminent domain, but land banks specifically not having that acquisition mechanism available to them, and how that may interact positively and negatively. If those powers are granted to all redevelopment authorities, it's a possibility.
And I'm looking at the co-sponsor memo, and one paragraph says, again, it's not the details of the bill. I have to see if I can get the draft bill. Granting redevelopment authorities the same powers allotted to land banks through the Pennsylvania Land Bank Act would allow them to acquire delinquent properties at judicial sale without competitive bidding, to discharge tax liens on these properties, to share up to 50% of real property taxes for 5 years. It would also eliminate the need to form an entity, right, a new entity in these municipalities. So I guess what it does not address, or I have to look at the details of the bill to see whether it addresses that issue of certain powers like eminent domain or requirements like the redevelopment agreement.
Yeah, redevelopment position.
That are imposed on or granted to or imposed on redevelopment authorities. So one of the reasons, excuse me, and when we were drafting the land bank law, this question came up: why not just use a redevelopment authority? Then one of the responses that I got from redevelopment authorities was, well, our hands are tied sometimes, with the redevelopment agreement. It's burdensome, and so I wonder how that would impact land acquired by the land bank, whether we would be imposing more restrictions on the land bank by having it operate sort of under the urban redevelopment law.
Yeah.
All right. I am going to contact his office now and see if I can get a copy of that. Anything else from around the state? Val, what do you think? 1:01 now.
Just about 1 o'clock right now. So I just want to thank Bethany again, and also Bethany, to make it easier for you, if you want to just send those policies, procedures, whatever documents directly to me, then what I'll do is I'll just send everything in one email to everyone on the call, along with your PowerPoint slideshow, if that's okay, and the recording, and then it'll all be there. So that'll be probably the easiest thing to do. So that's great. And then in terms of our next call, that would be sometime in June. Most likely it'll be Thursday, the 22nd of June, but we will, notify people of that. And again, if there's any specific topics or anything related to the land banks that you'd like to see discussed on these calls, we're always open to hearing what you would like to learn about. So please let me know. And again, thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks again, Bethany, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Hope we get to get outside for a little bit. All right, take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.